Bonjour à tous et
good morning to all. Good morning and welcome for this second day of LHFORUM, Forum for Positive Economy. I hope that you are all comfortably seated. We've got lots on our plate for this morning. And the first session this morning will be on CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility. It's an idea that started in the 60s, and at the beginning it was the S was social, social responsibility, corporate social responsibility. And then they added ecology to it, and it became societal responsibility, and then it included sustainable development. And for this first morning together for session, we're going to ask the European Director of Ashoka to come. He's the managing director. Ashoka is present in 70 countries. Recently, they celebrated their 30th anniversary. It was born in India. That's why it's called Ashoka, which in Hindi means no constraints. Ashoka is present in all of these countries and tries to help social partners be present and raise social consciousness everywhere where they are present. So to open this, we want to ask the European Managing Director, Arnaud Mourot, to come. He represents Ashoka. Thank you. Good morning to all. Thank you very much for receiving me here. Thank you for this introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. And what I'd like to suggest is share with you here Ashoka and the story of Ashoka. Most of you probably have never heard of Ashoka. I can't hold that against you. It's an international network of social entrepreneurs. Since 70 years, they have tried to identify women and men who try to put forward new solutions to society challenges. It was born in 30 years ago, not 70, 30 years ago in India. When you think about societal matters, things like that happen in the south of the world more often than elsewhere. This civil society that was there set up microcredits lines, solidarity approaches to economy. That's where things arose in these parts of the world. And right now, that is where a lot comes from. And so these flows of social innovation are often south to north, which is very interesting. Ashoka was born 30 years ago in India on this basic idea of identifying the people who carried these innovations, who put them forward. They were convinced that new society models were required, and at the same time, they wanted their entrepreneurship to be put at the service of major challenges, health, education, environment. And they did this with the will to change a system. And when you think about social entrepreneurship, well, that expression contains society, but also talks about those who are entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurship meaning create companies. And Ashoka's mission was to identify these women and men who are present in the world. There was strict selection, and now in over 70 countries, we are working with about 3,000 social entrepreneurs, which then has allowed us to be an observatory of the main world challenges, the innovations that you find among these women and men. It also has given us an idea for future models that are appearing worldwide. That's what I wanted to share with you this morning, to explain to you how social entrepreneurship is evolving towards hybrid models that are closer to traditional ways of doing business. This is happening at a time when in the world of entrepreneurship we need to reinvent who and what we are. There are no real models, good models, so we're exploring new avenues. And then this area of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. In France, you talk a lot about social economy, but that's not what I'm going to talk about with you this morning. You're going to have a minister coming this morning. He will talk about that much better than I can do. And then when you cross the French borders going south, social economy is a notion that doesn't exist in India and Brazil. Social economy is not really developed. There's no real term to describe it. It's a type of exception. It's French cultural exception again, which allows us to describe this movement which emerged about 150 years ago with mutual funds, with associations and co-ops. And so I talk about social entrepreneurship. It's a more generic term that we find nowadays again in most of the countries of the world. And I was struck by the fact that 30 years ago, when we started to talk about this term, and Bill, the founder of Ashoka, was the first one to make this social entrepreneurship term a very useful one. And as the years went by, and particularly in the past decade, we saw an acceleration in the number of universities, media, and corporate groups who were interested in this. And social entrepreneurship is starting to become mainstream. There's still a lot of work to do, but we see more and more companies. We see more and more of these social entrepreneurs appearing. So this movement is growing now. And the question that we can ask ourselves is whether this movement is enough to answer the main challenges in society. We could think that to have more and more social entrepreneurs is a good idea and a good piece of news. It is a good piece of news, but when you start looking at what is at stake in society, when you note that 15 to 20% of the world population is under the poverty threshold, and with a very, very low income, we are far from having solved what is at stake in society. And what we see also is the traditional models of responding by NGOs, major institutions, or the state. Those models are very efficient for certain things, but not for solving challenges that are worldwide. And the gap between the rich countries and the populations that manage well and those that are really in difficult situations is a gap that is widening. And so we need to see if this model of solidarity, including social entrepreneurship, is sufficient as a model. And Ashoka started reflecting on this, has been doing that for 7 to 8 years. And we were working with a lot of business entrepreneurs, people who wanted to see an increase in the number of social entrepreneurs worldwide. But are these really able to solve what is at stake alone? And the idea is no, they can't do that alone. So then what were the new models that we needed to set up? And how can you invent nowadays systems that would then allow to include as many people as possible and to help people to live in unshamefully in a good situation. And when you look at this population, when you look at social entrepreneurs, you note that it's a wonderful source of innovation. Entrepreneurs are probably the ones, or social entrepreneurs are the ones who know these populations living in difficult situations, because they are the ones that they work with on a daily basis. So they developed empathy with them and a wonderful capacity to understand what the problems are and to start answering the needs in a very visionary way. There are a few exceptions, obviously, but it's the scope, the size of these companies that is interesting. Most of them are tiny, very mobile. They move easily, which is true. But what is truly at stake is that there's a change of scale in terms of organization. And the question we ask nowadays is how can we develop the development and the presence of such social entrepreneurs? And that is very interesting. And when we talk about growth and development, we tend to think that this organization itself should grow. And Companies usually think that they need to grow to survive, but for social entrepreneurs, that's not the case. Most of the time, these entrepreneurs are not obsessed by the size of their company, but the size of their impact, which is a very important nuance. And look at Yunus for his microcredit, the Nobel Prize. He not only developed the Grameen Bank, but also became the ambassador of microcredit, so that more and more companies and organizations and institutions would start looking into microcredit, use it, and develop it. And so, most of the time, the social entrepreneurs are very open to the idea of sharing their models, which is very, very different from the traditional business world. And this is why they're close to open source. Most of the time, open source means sharing, pooling everything. Pooling it so that everybody can use it. And that's one of the characteristics of these social entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, it's not enough nowadays. If we want to, once again, deal in a striking way with all of the challenges that are in the world. And then if we want to accelerate this movement and try and share ideas, is we need to increase the number of players. We need the public authorities to be catalysts in this movement. We need more to know about this. So in other words, how do you develop this culture of change? How do you make sure that more and more people run risks and are ready to work on the issues of society? If you work on this community of 3,000 social entrepreneurs, about 80% of the 3,000 were involved for the first time between 12 and 18 years. In other words, when you give a teenager or a child the capacity to commit, to do something, test it around you. Most of the time, he's going to ask you what you want to do, and it's a very altruistic project, a project that aims towards others. Whether it's in school, his parish, his neighborhood, it's often a small-scale project, but most of the time turned towards the others. Most teenagers are saying, we want to reinvent internet, but no, not in that area. If you ask children, young people, most of the time they will offer projects that are geared towards other people. And that is encouraging. It means that human nature is altruistic as such. And it's interesting also that to know that if we help our children have initiative, then it's a gift that we give them. In 20 or 30 years, they will want to launch their company again. And if they don't become social entrepreneurs, even in traditional entrepreneurs companies, even in the companies where they will be involved, they will have an attitude, they will have a way of dealing with issues that will be completely different. And so what we decided now at Ashoka was that another one of our trends would be to develop programs geared towards primary schools, secondary schools, and even universities, to help along multiply opportunities of implementing activities of young people around us. And for those of you who do this already, I encourage you, because it's really important to be able to go on and to raise the awareness of this next generation. And change-making is what you do now, and that is very important. That's another thing. Now, next, what we need to do is break down walls. Companies are in boxes: social sector, the voluntary sector, the serious business, and then when you look at what is at stake worldwide in society, you will see that each one of these three systems tries to share or to contribute one part of the solution. Take education, energy, health, and each one tries to supply their own model. They often reinvent the wheel, and they try and survive without creating synergies with others. But if you remember what I was telling you earlier, there's nothing much better than social entrepreneurs, because since the beginning, all of them are there. They have in their genes to look towards the others, whereas companies are accelerators, machines that will help to industrialize products and machines themselves. But it's often top-down. It's product-oriented, not customer-oriented. And so there's really a subject here. How can we take innovations, entrepreneurs, how can we then take this potential of accelerating issues and create more hybrid models that would take into account these two, if not three parts, if you want to include also the public authorities. They also have something wonderful to be involved in. We can reinvent services, public services, society with more efficient models. We published a study which is in this booklet that you have, which allowed us to demonstrate the efficiency of social entrepreneurs. When you look at their models and the economy that they can produce for society, its figures are extremely striking. Certainly if you develop their model and it becomes a standard. And so public authorities have a historic possibility of using these hybrid solutions, which are between social and business, which would allow us to invent new ways of answering the different challenges in very major ways. Once again, if we look at the 4 billion individuals that are at the bottom of the pyramid, the BOPs, if we look at these 15% in France, over 8 million people. And so philanthropy is not enough, and the response of the state is not enough. Which models would help us touch the whole of the population? Well, except for a market approach, we don't really see how we could serve the population with a capital P. What does that mean? It means that we need to be able to move from a logic of serving beneficiaries free of charge, as in a volunteer or charitable organization, and reinvent models with customers. And these populations, even poor populations, are potential customers. And as any potential customer, they are entitled to good services, quality services, with buying power. They also have buying power. And a certain number of pilots were launched in different countries, most of the time countries in the south, to see how we could indeed bring products and services to these low-income populations. And it's possible, absolutely, if we are able to invent alliances with social entrepreneurs, and they would be locally your marketing agents, your social distribution network, which means they could be your conduit to the local populations. Does that mean we will be making business and doing this at the detriment of the poor? No. This is we need to think about this. If we can touch more of the population, if these hybrid models will entitle you tomorrow that 3 billion people would then step out of the poverty zone and move upwards, why not? But again, I repeat, what is at stake is to change our think out of the box. That's what we need to do. Think out of the box. When you're a social entrepreneur, the company will not work for the same reason as you. That's why these models are difficult. You need to bring people together who will be working towards the same objective, but from different angles, for different objectives, reasons. But if we work together, I think that's what is important, and that's why we should co-create. That's why we can work together and have the possibility of doing this more and more. And it's by making mistakes, by testing, by learning from our errors, and we need to work on a trial and error basis. And so, as you have understood, the question now is changing the scale of things. the social model is becoming more and more recognized, and efforts are being deployed. But what we want to do is involve more and more people who are well trained, who want to go further with these models. And obviously, our schools need to become interested in this. It means that social entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurships or companies, social companies, must be able to accommodate people who will be involved in businesses like these. When there aren't many constraints, then people are ready to launch into this. But when things get a bit more complicated, they go back into traditional business. And working with business entrepreneurs is akin to philanthropy. It's a new way of launching research and development, of developing talents within a company, corporate talents. We will have the opportunity later to explain the model that Ashoka developed with Boehringer, which is a pharmaceutical company. One of the most powerful components of our program is the high flyers in companies can go immerse themselves on social entrepreneurships for a few weeks, a few months, and it's an extraordinary experience. When they come back, they have given meaning to their professional careers, they have seen new models in the field, and they become extraordinary examples and ambassadors. These are entrepreneurs who are within an entrepreneur company, those who develop and go further. Those are the ambassadors. So we need to look at things differently, from a different angle, to think out of the box again. Too often, social economy was one thing, and it was supposedly 10% of the global economy, which is a good piece of news. But then how can you flow from these 10 into the 90 remaining? And the 90% remaining must be ready to, little by little, be changed. So this dominating economy will find it useful to work with social entrepreneurs. This is what we think is a basis for, or those are the fundamentals for this for this economy, which is also a positive economy. This is why we can move forward, lean towards others, review how we have distributed solidarity. I'm sure we can be extremely optimistic in terms of the future of the world. We'll be able to do a lot of good for the planet and for ourselves too. Thank you very much.